In the sprawling expanse of the Galactic Confederation, where 1,000 species coexist under the banner of universal peace, there exists a classification system for planetary environments. Class A worlds are paradises, gentle gravity, breathable atmospheres, and ecosystems so docile that their inhabitants have never known true predators. Class B worlds present moderate challenges. Class C worlds are harsh, but manageable. Then, there are the Deathworlds. Terra, Earth, holds the unprecedented classification of Class C, a rating so extreme that most galactic citizens believe it to be a clerical error. After all, how could any species evolve on a planet where the very air contains enough oxygen to fuel explosive combustion? Where massive chunks of ice regularly fall from the sky with enough force to kill? Where the dominant species not only survived, but thrive alongside creatures that could crush starship hulls with their bare appendages? The Galactic Naval Academy on Kepler Station had admitted exactly 3 humans in its 400-year history. The first had been discharged after accidentally breaking a superior officer's arm during what humans call a handshake. The second had caused a diplomatic incident by suggesting that their combat training scenarios were too easy and offering to demonstrate real fighting techniques from back home. Marcus Chun was the third. And today, 4 of the Academy's most elite cadets were about to discover why humans were classified as an extinction-level threat species in 17 different galactic databases. The attack would last exactly 12 seconds. The consequences would reshape everything the galaxy thought it knew about the strange, terrifying species from the little blue death world at the edge of the Orion. Our Marcus Chun had been trying to keep his head down for 3 months now, and it was proving to be the most difficult mission of his young life. Not because the coursework at the Galactic Naval Academy was challenging, though quantum navigation and multi-species diplomatic protocols did require attention, but because every instinct honed by 18 years on Earth screamed at him to react when threatened. The mess hall of Kepler Station buzzed with the typical evening chatter of 1,200 cadets representing 47 different species. Marcus sat alone at his usual table near the viewport, mechanically consuming what the food synthesizers claimed was human-compatible protein, while watching the swirl of distant nebulae beyond the station's massive transparent aluminum walls. The view reminded him of home, though Earth's sky had never held quite the same ethereal beauty. Then, again, Earth's sky had also never been safe to stare at without protection, thanks to the radiation from their abnormally aggressive star. Still eating alone, Deathworlder? The voice belonged to Zexai Mordan, a hegemony cadet whose blue-scaled hide and impressive height of nearly 7 feet made him a formidable presence among most species. To Marcus, who had grown up in a world where grizzly bears and great white sharks were considered normal fauna, Zexai looked like a slightly oversized iguana with delusions of grandeur. Marcus continued chewing, not looking up. The Academy's integration protocols specifically warned human cadets about the importance of avoiding confrontation. Apparently, the previous human applicants had not received this memo clearly enough. I heard Instructor Veltar talking about you today, Zexai continued, sliding his imposing frame into the seat across from Marcus. 2 other hegemony cadets flanked him, Crixna and Yathol, both nearly as large as their leader. A 4th figure, a pale, willowy Etherian named Sil Quinn, took the remaining seat. The Etherians were known for their psychic abilities and their insufferable sense of superiority. He said humans require special handling because your species lacks proper evolutionary pressure. Marcus finally looked up, meeting Zexai's predatory golden eyes. Did he now? Indeed. He explained that your homeworld, despite its dramatic classification, never properly culled the weak from your gene pool. That's why humans are so. Zexai gestured dismissively, emotionally unstable. The mess hall seemed to quiet around them, though whether from genuine interest or the instinctive recognition of brewing conflict, Marcus couldn't tell. He noticed several other cadets turning to watch, including a group of Paklon whose insectoid features made their expressions unreadable, and a cluster of furry Yithka who had paused their chittering conversations. Emotionally unstable, Marcus repeated, setting down his utensil with deliberate care. His movements were slow, controlled, almost meditative. Anyone familiar with human body language might have recognized this as a warning sign. Unfortunately, none of the beings at his table possessed such knowledge. The instructor believes, Silquin interjected, their voice carrying the musical quality common to Etherians, that humans overcompensate for their world's fictional dangers with aggression, a psychological defense mechanism to mask inherent weakness. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Fictional dangers. I see. Crixnah leaned forward, emboldened by his companions. My home world has storms that can dissolve unprotected flesh in minutes. Yathol comes from a planet where the gravity is 3 times galactic standard. Silquin's people evolved on a world where reality itself is unstable. But Earth? He made a sound that might have been laughter. Your world is just normal. Slightly high oxygen content, and some large animals. Hardly a death world. The classification system must have malfunctioned, Yathol added with certainty. No true death world species would be so docile. Marcus smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, though his alien tablemates interpreted it as submission. On Earth, that particular smile was typically the last thing many predators saw. You know, Marcus said conversationally, back home, we have this animal called a honey badger. Little thing, maybe weighs 30 pounds soaking wet. Looks cute and fuzzy. But honey badgers regularly fight lions, leopards, and hyenas, sometimes all 3 at once. And they win. The 4 cadets exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed by this apparent non sequitur. The thing about honey badgers, Marcus continued, his voice remaining calm and measured, is that they don't look dangerous. They don't posture or threaten. They just are. And when something threatens them, they don't negotiate. They don't de-escalate. They simply respond with overwhelming violence until the threat stops being a threat. Zexhi's golden eyes narrowed. Are you threatening us, human? Oh no, Marcus replied, still smiling that unsettling smile. I'm explaining. The mess hall's ambient noise seemed to fade as more cadets became aware of the tension at Marcus's table. Even the station's ever-present hum appeared to diminish, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Silquin's psychic abilities apparently picked up something the others missed, because their pale features suddenly showed the first hint of concern. Perhaps we should, you see, Marcus interrupted gently. Earth didn't make us tough by throwing single challenges at us. It made us adaptable by throwing everything at us simultaneously. Predators that hunt in packs. Whether that can kill you in dozens of different ways. Diseases that can drop you in hours. Radiation that causes cellular mutations. Geological instability. Atmospheric events that can level entire regions. He leaned back in his chair, apparently relaxed. We didn't evolve on a death world because we're tough. We evolved to be tough because we had to survive a death world. Yathol snorted. Big talk for someone who sits alone and avoids conflict. I don't avoid conflict, Marcus said quietly. I manage it. The distinction seemed lost on his audience. Zexhi stood slowly, his full height casting a shadow over Marcus's seated form. Maybe it's time someone taught the Death Worlder how things work outside his little backwater system. Marcus remained seated, but something in his posture shifted. The change was subtle, a slight adjustment in his center of gravity, a barely perceptible tensing of his shoulders, a micro-expression that crossed his features like a cloud passing over the sun. Those familiar with human behavior might have recognized it as the moment a switch flipped, transforming a patient young man into something altogether more dangerous. Stand up, Zexhi commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to intimidating others. Marcus looked around the mess hall. Nearly 100 cadets were now openly watching. In the distance, he could see Instructor Veltar observing from the faculty section, making no move to intervene. The Zentorian's multiple eyes were fixed on the confrontation with what appeared to be scientific interest rather than concern. You know, Marcus said, still not moving, there's something else about honey badgers you should know. We're not interested in your earth animals, Crixnah snarled. Marcus continued as if he hadn't spoken. When a honey badger is cornered by multiple threats, it doesn't try to fight them one at a time. That would be inefficient. Instead, it targets the biggest threat first, eliminates it as quickly as possible, then uses the shock and confusion to deal with the others. Finally, Marcus stood. The movement was fluid, economical, betraying none of the coiled tension that human observers might have detected. To the alien cadets, he simply looked small and outnumbered. The key, Marcus said, taking a single step closer to HFY, is speed. What happened next would be analyzed, debated, and reviewed in tactical courses throughout the Galactic Naval Academy for years to come. Marcus's first movement was so fast that most observers later claimed they hadn't seen it happen. One moment he was standing normally, and the next his right elbow was buried in HFY's solar plexus with enough force to lift the 7-foot alien off his feet. The hegemony cadet's breath exploded from his lungs in a strangled gasp as he doubled over, his nervous system temporarily overwhelmed by the impact. Before HFY could even begin to fall, Marcus's left hand had already moved, executing what human martial artists call a hammer fist to the back of his opponent's skull. The blow was precisely calculated, hard enough to cause immediate unconsciousness, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. HFY dropped to the deck like a severed puppet. Elapsed time, 2 seconds. Crixna, being the closest remaining threat, was already moving forward when Marcus pivoted and drove his knee upward into the alien's descending jaw. The hegemony cadet's forward momentum worked against him, transforming what might have been a painful blow into a fight-ending strike. Crixna's head snapped back with a wet crack, his eyes rolling upward as consciousness fled. Yathol, trained on a high-gravity world and possessing considerable physical strength by galactic standards, managed to get his hands up in a defensive posture. Unfortunately for him, human combat techniques had been refined by millennia of warfare against opponents who were bigger, stronger, and often better armed. Marcus slipped inside Yathol's guard with a sidestep that seemed almost casual, then drove his right hand forward in a palm strike that targeted the alien's throat. The blow collapsed Yathol's trachea temporarily, cutting off his air supply and sending him into immediate panic. As the larger alien clutched his throat, gasping for breath, Marcus swept his legs and guided his fall to ensure his head met the deck with sufficient force to ensure unconsciousness. Elapsed time, 6 seconds. Silquin, the Etherian, was already backpedaling, their pale hands raised in what might have been surrender or an attempt to use their psychic abilities. Marcus didn't wait to find out which. He closed the distance in 2 swift steps and delivered a precisely controlled strike to the nerve cluster at the base of Silquin's neck, a technique that worked on most humanoid species and caused immediate unconsciousness without lasting damage. The Etherian collapsed gracefully, their psychic emanations flickering out like a snuff candle. Total elapsed time, 12 seconds. Marcus stood among the 4 unconscious forms, his breathing barely elevated, his uniform still neat and unwrinkled. He looked around the now silent mess hall at the hundreds of staring faces, then calmly returned to his seat and picked up his utensil. The thing about being from a Deathworld, he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence, is that you learn to be efficient. He took another bite of his protein substitute and gazed out at the nebulae, apparently lost in contemplation. In the faculty section, Instructor Veltar's multiple eyes were recording everything, his mental notes already beginning to form what would become the most downloaded tactical analysis in Academy history. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before the normal sounds of the mess hall gradually resumed, though at a much lower volume than before. Cadets gave Marcus's table a conspicuously wide berth as medical personnel were summoned to attend to the unconscious hegemony and Etherian cadets. Marcus finished his meal in peace, just as he had hoped to do from the beginning. Sometimes, he reflected, the most efficient way to avoid conflict was to demonstrate exactly why avoiding conflict was in everyone's best interest. Outside the viewport, the cosmic dance continued, beautiful and serene and utterly indifferent to the small dramas played out by the tiny beings within their metal shells, hurling themselves across the void in pursuit of understanding and purpose. But on Kepler Station, everything had just changed. Word of the 12-second encounter would spread throughout the Academy within hours, carried by the incredible efficiency of gossip networks that transcended species barriers. By the next morning, every cadet, instructor, and staff member would know that the quiet human from Earth, the one who sat alone and seemed so harmless, had just demonstrated why his homeworld carried a Class C rating. And in the restricted databases accessible only to high-ranking military officials, a notation would be added to humanity's file. Previous assessment confirmed. Recommend extreme caution in all interactions. Consider upgrading threat classification to Extinction Level Plus. Marcus, blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic tremors he had set in motion, simply finished his dinner and returned to his quarters to study for tomorrow's exam on interspecies communication protocols. The irony was not lost on those who knew him well enough to appreciate it. The medical bay of Kepler Station hummed with activity as Dr. Titricifera examined the 4 unconscious cadets. The Zentorian physician's multiple optical organs whirred and clicked as she conducted her scans, her long, articulated fingers dancing over diagnostic equipment with practiced precision. "Fascinating," she murmured, her translator rendering her native clicking language into standard galactic. "The precision is remarkable." Assistant Medical Officer Joran, a young Paklon whose insectoid features twitched nervously, checked his readings again. "Doctor, the hegemony cadets show textbook signs of combat concussion, but the neural pathways suggest the damage was carefully controlled. And this one," he gestured to Sil Quinn's unconscious form, "has been rendered unconscious through targeted nerve disruption. I've never seen such surgical precision in combat application." Dr. Professor's main eyes focused on Zexhai, who was beginning to show signs of consciousness. "What troubles me, Joran, is the efficiency. For opponents, all significantly larger than the human, all possessing natural advantages in strength, size, or supernatural abilities. Yet the engagement lasted exactly 12 seconds, and all 4 were incapacitated without permanent damage. The human held back," Joran observed, his mandibles clicking uncertainly. "Precisely. Which raises the question, what would have happened if he hadn't?" In the mess hall, the cleanup crew had finished removing the traces of the confrontation, but the psychological impact lingered. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and more than one cadet found excuses to walk past Marcus's usual table, now empty, as if hoping to glean some insight from proximity to the site. Cadet Zura Ventai, a Yithka from the forest world of Dendros, sat with her study group at a table 3 rows away from where the incident had occurred. Her species' heightened senses had allowed her to perceive details that others might have missed. "The scent," she explained to her companions, her furry ears twitching as she recalled the memory. "Before the human moved, his scent changed. Not fear or anger, those I know. This was something else, something focused." Her study partner, a crystalline Silnari named Quartzon, whose species experienced emotions as color patterns, shimmered uncertainly. "My chromatic perception registered something unprecedented during those 12 seconds. The human's emotional spectrum, it was unlike anything in our databases." "How so?" asked Temuro, a gaseous nebulae who existed within a specialized containment suit. "Most beings exhibit fear, rage, excitement, or bloodlust during combat. The human showed none of these. If I had to classify it, Quartzon's crystalline form shifted through several subtle hues. It would be closest to what you might call professional satisfaction." The implications of this observation settled over the group like a cold stellar wind. Meanwhile, in the Academy's administrative sector, an emergency session of the Interspecies Integration Committee was already underway. The chamber's holographic display showed security footage of the mess hall incident, frozen at the moment Marcus delivered his first strike to Zexhai. Committee Chairman Morgul Vasthai, a distinguished titanosaurian whose species had evolved on a world with gravity so intense that they were nearly indestructible, studied the image with growing concern. Replay the sequence again. Enhanced speed analysis. The hologram flickered, and the 12-second encounter played out in ultra-slow motion. Even at reduced speed, Marcus's movements appeared fluid and purposeful, each action flowing seamlessly into the next with mechanical precision. The targeting is surgical. Observe committee member Silandra Himweaver, an Etherian elder whose psychic abilities far exceeded those of young Silquin. Each strike was calculated to incapacitate without causing permanent harm. This suggests extensive training in non-lethal combat techniques. Or interjected Security Chief Colfax, a gruff hegemony officer whose scales bore the scars of numerous conflicts. It suggests someone who has had considerable practice in escalating to lethal force and chose not to. The restraint itself is what concerns me. Dr. Alwyn Starweaver, the Academy's chief psychologist and a member of the ethereal void high species, manifested her concerns as swirling patterns of dark energy. We must consider the psychological profile. The human showed no signs of emotional elevation before, during, or after the confrontation. This level of detachment during violence is disturbing. Chairman Vasthai's massive form shifted, causing the chamber to vibrate slightly. What are your recommendations? Immediate psychological evaluation. Dr. Starweaver replied without hesitation. If this human is suffering from some form of emotional dissociation, he could be dangerous to himself and others. What if it's not a disorder? Asked Silandra quietly. What if this is simply how humans approach conflict? The committee members exchanged glances that conveyed a universe of concern. If Silandra was correct, then humanity's classification as a potential extinction-level threat might have been conservative. In Dormitory Section 7, news of the incident had spread through the communication networks with the speed of quantum entanglement. Marcus's roommate, a gentle Paclon named Cheekrick, sat at his study terminal with his mandibles clicking nervously. Cheekrick came from a peaceful agricultural world where the most dangerous predator was roughly equivalent to Earth's rabbits, and the concept of casual violence was completely foreign to his psychology. When Marcus entered their shared quarters, Cheekrick nearly jumped out of his carapace. "Marcus, I heard about the incident. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Should I contact the counseling services?" Marcus looked at his roommate with mild confusion. "Why would I need medical attention? I wasn't hurt." "But the fight, what fight?" Marcus asked, genuinely puzzled. "4 cadets made some unfortunate choices, and I responded appropriately. The situation was resolved efficiently." Cheekrick's compound eyes whirred as he attempted to process this response. "You don't consider what happened to be a fight." Marcus sat down at his own study terminal and activated his coursework. Cheekrick, a fight implies mutual participation in combat. What happened in the mess hall was a brief educational demonstration about threat assessment and response. Educational demonstration. Kai Krieg repeated weekly. They learned that humans from Deathworlds shouldn't be underestimated. I learned that hegemony physiology makes them vulnerable to solar plexus strikes. Everyone benefited from the exchange of information. The complete absence of malice, boasting, or even emotional investment in Marcus's voice made Cheekrick's species-specific fear responses activate involuntarily. His kind had evolved sophisticated danger detection capabilities precisely because they were prey animals, and every instinct he possessed was now screaming that his roommate was potentially the most dangerous being he had ever encountered. And the most terrifying part was that Marcus seemed completely unaware of this effect. 3 levels below, in the Academy's secured communications center, Admiral Thylac, Destroyer of Worlds, was conducting an emergency consultation with the Galactic Council's Threat Assessment Division. The Admiral species, the Void Bane, had earned their fearsome reputation by successfully defending the galaxy against 3 separate extinction-level threats over the past millennium. The incident itself is concerning, Admiral Thylac rumbled, his voice carrying undertones that could shatter glass. but the humans' casual dismissal of it afterward is what has my attention. The holographic figure of Counselor Prime, Zelnaga, flickered slightly as the quantum communication array struggled with the distance. Explain. According to witnesses, the human finished his meal, returned to his quarters, and began studying for exams as if nothing had happened. No boasting, no emotional elevation, no apparent concern about consequences. Our xenopsychology experts believe this indicates either severe psychological dissociation or a cultural norm that treats violence as mundane problem-solving. The implications of the latter possibility are: Counselor Zelnaga's form wavered as a species' natural electromagnetic field fluctuated with stress. Indeed, if casual violence is a normal problem-solving methodology for humans, and if this particular human is considered average by species standards, then our threat assessment models may need significant revision. Back in the medical bay, Zexai had finally regained full consciousness. His golden eyes focused on Dr. Tetrasisra with difficulty, one hand moving instinctively to his bruised throat. What hit me?" he croaked. "A human," the doctor replied clinically. "Cadet Marcus Chun, to be specific." Zexai's eyes widened as memory returned. "Impossible. I outweigh him by 60 kilograms. My bone density is 3 times standard. My species has been bred for combat for 10,000 years. And yet, you were unconscious for 47 minutes, Dr. HFY Cicero observed. Perhaps your species' breeding program didn't account for opponents who approach combat as a scientific discipline rather than an emotional release." In the adjacent medical bed, Crixnas stirred and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his jaw. "The speed," he mumbled through swollen facial features. "No one moves that fast." "Actually," interjected Joran, consulting his datapad, "according to our analysis, the human's movements were well within normal parameters for his species. What appeared to be superhuman speed was actually optimal efficiency. No wasted motion, perfect targeting, immediate follow-through." Silquin, whose psychic abilities were slowly returning online, attempted to probe the recent memories for additional details. What they found made their pale features grow even whiter. The human's mind during the confrontation, they whispered. It was like looking into a tactical computer. No emotion, no hesitation, just calculations. Distance, timing, force vectors, probability matrices. It was beautiful and terrifying. Dr. Tetrasisra made additional notes on her datapad. "I want full neurological workups on all 4 of you. This incident has revealed significant gaps in our understanding of human psychology and capabilities." As the medical staff continued their examinations, word of the mess hall incident continued to spread throughout Kepler Station. By the next morning, it would reach the outer colonies. Within a week, it would be discussed in the halls of the Galactic Senate. Within a month, it would result in the first comprehensive review of humanity's threat classification since their discovery. But for now, in the quiet of Dormitory Section 7, Marcus Chun continued studying for his exam on interspecies diplomatic protocols, occasionally pausing to help Chikrik with a particularly difficult quantum mechanics problem. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a dedicated student working toward his goal of serving in the Galactic Navy. The fact that he had just casually demonstrated why his entire species was classified as a potential extinction-level threat seemed to have no impact whatsoever on his study schedule. This, more than the violence itself, was what would keep xenopsychologists awake for months to come, trying to understand a species that could compartmentalize lethal capability so completely that it became mundane. In the depths of space, aboard the hegemony battleship Sovereignty, Fleet Commander Torgash received a priority communication from his son Zexai. The message was brief. "Father, we need to talk about the humans. Urgently." The commander's scales darkened with concern. His son was not given to overstatement, and the communication bore priority encryption codes reserved for genuine emergencies. Within hours, the Sovereignty would change course for Kepler Station, beginning a chain of events that would ultimately reshape the balance of power in the entire galactic arm. But that was tomorrow's crisis. Tonight, Marcus Chun completed his studies, said good night to his nervous roommate, and settled into sleep with the easy conscience of someone who had simply handled a minor social situation with appropriate efficiency. Dreams, when they came, were of Earth's blue skies and the sound of his grandmother's voice teaching him the ancient principle that had guided his actions. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and handle whatever comes with quiet competence. It was advice that had served humanity well for millennia. Soon, the rest of the galaxy would understand why. The arrival of the hegemony battleship Sovereignty at Kepler Station sent ripples of concern through the Academy's command structure. The massive vessel, bristling with weapons that could crack a moon's crust, had not scheduled any visits, nor had it requested permission to dock. It simply appeared on the edge of the system and broadcast a single message: request immediate conference with Academy Command regarding Cadet Marcus Chun. Admiral Thylak stood in the station's command center, his massive form dwarfing the other officers as they monitored the approaching vessel. The Sovereignty was one of the hegemony's most advanced warships, commanded by Fleet Commander Torgash, a warrior whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his notorious temper. Sir, reported Communications Officer Lilandra, her crystalline features refracting the bridge's lighting in patterns that indicated stress. Fleet Commander Torgash is requesting immediate transport to the station. His message indicates this concerns his son. Admiral Thylak's expression darkened. The connection between Zexhai and the human incident was obvious, but the implications of a hegemony fleet commander taking personal interest in a routine disciplinary matter were troubling. The hegemony had been humanity's strongest opponents during the initial contact negotiations, arguing that any species from a Class Z Deathworld should be quarantined for galactic safety. Grant him permission to dock, the Admiral ordered, and summoned Cadet Chun to Conference Room Alpha. It's time we had a proper conversation. 30 minutes later, Marcus found himself sitting across from the most imposing alien he had ever encountered. Fleet Commander Torgash stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scales darker and more prominent than his son's, bearing the scars of countless battles. His golden eyes held an intelligence that Marcus recognized immediately. This was not someone who had risen to power through politics or privilege. This was a warrior scholar, the most dangerous kind of opponent. Cadet Chun, Torgash began, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested barely controlled aggression. My son lies in your medical bay with injuries that, according to the reports, you inflicted in 12 seconds. Marcus nodded calmly. That's correct, sir. You show no remorse. I defended myself against 4 attackers who initiated hostilities. Marcus replied evenly. Remorse would imply I believe my actions were inappropriate. Torgash's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of surprise among his species. Most cadets would have been groveling by now, offering apologies and excuses. The human's calm acceptance of responsibility was unexpected. My son outweighs you considerably. He has been trained in combat since childhood. His bones are denser than yours, his muscles stronger, his reflexes enhanced by evolutionary pressure. Yet you defeated him in seconds. How? Marcus considered the question carefully. With respect, sir, I think you're asking the wrong question. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop several degrees as Torgash's predatory instincts locked onto what could be interpreted as insolence. Explain. You're asking how I defeated someone larger and stronger, but that assumed size and strength are the primary factors in combat effectiveness. My species learned long ago that intelligence, training, and adaptability usually trump raw physical advantages. Admiral Thylak, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, leaned forward with interest. Continue. Your son and his companions made several tactical errors. They assumed their physical advantages guaranteed victory. They initiated hostilities in an environment where they couldn't retreat or call for assistance. They failed to coordinate their attack effectively. And, most importantly, they underestimated their opponent based on incomplete intelligence. Torgash's eyes narrowed to golden slits. You speak as if combat is a mathematical equation. Isn't it? Marcus asked genuinely. Force applied correctly at the right time, and place will always overcome force applied incorrectly, regardless of the raw quantities involved. That's basic physics. Dr. Ilwyn Starweaver, who had been observing the interaction through her psychic abilities, materialized her growing alarm as swirling patterns of dark energy. Admiral, I'm detecting something unusual in the human's psychological profile during this conversation. All eyes turned to the ethereal psychologist, who seemed to be struggling with her observations. There's no deception, no fear, no aggression. His confidence isn't bravado. It's based on genuine assessment of capabilities and probabilities. He truly believes he was never in danger during the confrontation. Because he wasn't, Marcus said simply. The engagement was essentially over before it began. The only variables were how quickly I could end it, and how much force I needed to apply to ensure compliance without causing permanent damage. The casual way he discussed calculated violence sent uncomfortable ripples through the assembled officers. This wasn't the boasting of a young warrior or the trauma response of someone who had survived a dangerous encounter. This was clinical analysis of tactical effectiveness. Fleet Commander Torgash stood slowly, his full height casting shadows across the conference table. Human, you speak of my son as if he were a training exercise. Sir, I speak of the situation as a tactical problem that required solving. Your son and his companions presented variables that needed to be addressed. I addressed them efficiently. Variables, Torgash repeated, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. Marcus seemed oblivious to the growing tension. Sir, if I may ask, what combat training has your son received? The question caught Torgash off guard. Standard hegemony military conditioning. Individual combat techniques, unit tactics, weapons proficiency. What? Has he ever trained against opponents from Deathworld species? There are no other Deathworld species in the known galaxy. Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had suspected. That explains the tactical errors. Your training programs are designed around opponents who evolved in relatively safe environments. Species that developed honor codes, ritualized combat, or dominance displays because individual survival wasn't constantly threatened. Dr. Starweaver's energy patterns shifted to deep purple, the color of profound concern. Admiral, you need to hear this. The human isn't just analyzing the combat encounter. He's analyzing our entire military training philosophy. Humans didn't have that luxury, Marcus continued, apparently unaware of the growing alarm around him. On Earth, everything was trying to kill everything else all the time. We couldn't afford honor codes or ritualized combat because hesitation meant death. We evolved to end threats as quickly and efficiently as possible. Admiral Thylak's massive form shifted uneasily. Are you saying your species has no concept of honorable combat? Marcus looked genuinely confused by the question. Honor is what you can afford when survival isn't in question. We have plenty of honor. We just don't let it interfere with staying alive. The implications of this statement settled over the conference room like a gravitational field. If Marcus was representative of human psychology, then humanity approached conflict from a completely different paradigm than every other known species. Cadet Chin, Admiral Thylak said carefully, are you considered a particularly skilled fighter among your people? Not really, Marcus replied honestly. I had basic self-defense training and played some contact sports in school. Most humans my age would have similar capabilities. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. If Marcus represented average human capability, then the threat assessment models weren't just wrong. They were catastrophically inadequate. Fleet Commander Torgash slowly resumed his seat, his aggressive posture shifting to something more analytical. Human, I need you to understand something. My son is among the elite of hegemony youth. He has been trained by the finest military instructors in our space. His defeat is not just a personal matter. It represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of combat effectiveness. I understand, sir, Marcus replied respectfully. But with respect, your understanding of combat effectiveness is based on fighting species that evolved under relatively peaceful conditions. You've optimized for scenarios that don't exist on worlds like Earth. Dr. Starweaver materialized her thoughts as shifting geometric patterns. Admiral, we need to consider the broader implications. If this human's capabilities are representative, then our tactical doctrines may need complete revision. More than that, Admiral Thylac rumbled ominously. If humanity's civilian population possesses combat capabilities that exceed our elite forces, then their military forces represent a threat level we cannot currently assess. Marcus looked around the table with growing awareness that his simple explanation had somehow escalated into a strategic crisis. Sirs, if I may, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not particularly dangerous by human standards. I'm just a student who happens to come from a world where being alert and capable of self-defense is normal. Normal, Fleet Commander Torgash repeated slowly. You consider your level of combat capability to be normal. Among humans? Yes, sir. We all grow up learning to assess threats and respond appropriately. It's basic survival skill. The gathered officers exchanged glances that carried the weight of impending paradigm shifts. Every military doctrine, every threat assessment, every strategic plan in the galactic database would need to be re-evaluated in light of this conversation. Cadet Chun, Admiral Thylac said finally, I want you to prepare a detailed report on standard human combat training and threat response protocols. Include anything you believe would be considered normal knowledge among your people. Certainly, sir. Should I include things like situational awareness, escape, and evasion techniques, improvised weapons, psychological warfare, and survival under extreme conditions? You consider those normal knowledge? Dr. Starweaver asked weakly. Basic life skills, Marcus confirmed. Every human child learns them. Admiral Thylac activated his personal communicator. Priority message to Galactic Command. Request immediate conference on humanity's threat classification. Recommend elevation to Code Omega, pending further assessment. Code Omega, a classification reserved for threats that could potentially destabilize galactic civilization itself. Sir, Marcus said hesitantly, is there some kind of problem? I was just trying to explain why the mess hall incident wasn't particularly significant. The room erupted in what could generously be called nervous laughter from multiple species simultaneously. The sound was deeply unsettling. Fleet Commander Torgash stood again, but this time his posture conveyed respect rather than aggression. Human, Marcus, you have just informed us that your species considers tactical combat analysis, threat assessment, and violence management to be childhood education. Do you understand why this might concern us? Marcus thought about it carefully. Because you've been assuming humans think about conflict the same way other species do? Precisely. And if we've been wrong about that, then you've been wrong about everything. Marcus finished quietly. Oh, the weight of realization settled over him as he began to understand the true scope of what he had revealed. His simple explanation of why 4 elite alien cadets hadn't presented a significant challenge had apparently undermined the basic assumptions underlying galactic military doctrine. I should probably mention, Marcus added reluctantly, that I'm studying to be a naval engineer. Combat isn't even my specialty. The sound Admiral Thylac made was unlike anything his species normally produced, a deep, resonant note that seemed to emerge from somewhere near his core. It was the sound of someone confronting the possibility that everything he thought he knew about the universe might be wrong. Outside the conference room, Kepler Station continued its routine operations, unaware that the balance of galactic power was shifting with each passing moment. In the medical bay, Zexhai and his companions were recovering from their encounter with human efficiency. In the dormitories, cadets whispered about the implications of the mess hall incident. And in the depths of space, quantum communication arrays carried urgent messages to every military command in the galaxy, all containing variations of the same basic theme: we need to talk about the humans. The conversation in Conference Room Alpha continued for another 3 hours, growing progressively more surreal as Marcus matter-of-factly described aspects of human childhood that made seasoned military officers question their fundamental understanding of civilization itself. By the end of it, Fleet Commander Torgash had requested permission to extend his stay at the Academy, not to demand satisfaction for his son's defeat, but to study the implications of humanity's approach to conflict and survival. "With your permission, Admiral," he said formally, "I would like to observe Cadet Chen's daily routine. For educational purposes." The request was granted, beginning what would later be known as the Kepler Protocols, the first systematic study of human psychology and capabilities by galactic military forces. Marcus, meanwhile, simply wanted to return to his quarters and continue studying for his exams. The fact that he had accidentally triggered a galactic military crisis by explaining basic human sociology was, in his opinion, a rather dramatic overreaction. But then, again, he came from a species that considered crisis management to be a normal part of daily life. The rest of the galaxy was about to learn what that really meant. The Galactic Senate emergency session convened 3 days after what historians would later call the Kepler Revelation. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the magnificent crystal amphitheater of Nexus Prime, their diverse forms creating a living mandala of galactic civilization. The emergency had been triggered by a single, deceptively simple report: reassessment of human threat classification required. Chancellor Vexmira Crystalheart, whose Silnari physiology allowed her to process multiple information streams simultaneously, called the session to order with harmonics that resonated through the chamber's quantum crystalline structure. "Honored representatives, we gather to address new intelligence regarding the species designation Homo sapiens of Terra." The massive holographic display at the chamber's center activated, showing Admiral Thylak's intimidating form. Even in hologram, his presence commanded attention from species that had evolved to recognize apex predators. "Honored Senate," the Admiral began, his voice carrying undertones that made several representatives instinctively check their escape routes. "We have discovered that our fundamental assumptions about human psychology and capability were not merely incorrect. They were catastrophically naive." Murmurs rippled through the assembly in a dozen different languages and communication methods. Representative Coralthax of the Hegemony, Fleet Commander Torgash's political cousin, activated his speaking platform. "Admiral, surely you exaggerate. One cadet's actions cannot justify such dramatic language." The holographic display shifted to show security footage of Marcus's 12-second encounter with the 4 alien cadets. Even in the vast Senate chamber, the casual efficiency of the violence was deeply unsettling. "This footage has been analyzed by our finest tactical experts," Admiral Thylak continued. "What you are observing is not the exceptional capability of an elite warrior. This is, according to the human himself, standard self-defense training that all humans receive as children." The chamber fell silent except for the soft harmonics of various species' involuntary stress responses. Senator Wispthul of the peaceful Yithka raised a delicate paw. Surely the human was simply boasting to intimidate his interrogators. "We considered that possibility," Admiral Thylak replied grimly. "So we conducted additional research." The holographic display changed again, this time showing a compilation of Earth's historical media. Images of human children playing contact sports that would be classified as combat training by galactic standards. Video of human adolescents casually handling what other species would consider dangerous tools. Footage of human adults engaging in recreational activities that involve controlled violence. "These are not military training exercises," Admiral Thylak explained. "These are human recreational activities. For entertainment." Representative Silcora of the Etherian Collective materialized her growing alarm as swirling vortices of psychic energy. "The implications are disturbing. If humans consider violence to be recreational." "It gets worse," Admiral Thylak interrupted. "Show them the Earth Wildlife compilation." The holographic display filled with images of Earth's fauna. Tigers stalking through forests. Great white sharks breaching the surface to catch prey. Grizzly bears standing 12 feet tall on their hind legs. Venomous spiders, poisonous snakes, aggressive primates, and pack-hunting wolves. "These creatures share the human homeworld," the Admiral continued. They evolved alongside humanity. And humans not only survived this environment, they dominated it so completely that they now protect these predators from extinction. The Senate chamber erupted in multilingual chaos as representatives attempted to process this information. The idea of a species so successfully adapted to a death world that they became its apex predator was beyond most civilizations' comprehension. Chancellor Crystal Hart restored order with a harmonic pulse that cut through the noise. Admiral, what are you recommending? Complete revision of all existing military doctrines, threat assessment protocols, and diplomatic strategies regarding humanity. And immediate implementation of what I'm calling the human paradigm. Explain. Admiral Thylak's massive form shifted as he prepared to deliver the most significant strategic briefing in galactic history. Every military doctrine in our databases assumes that violent capability correlates with aggressive intent, and that advanced civilizations naturally evolve beyond the need for individual combat prowess. Humans violate both assumptions. The holographic display now showed Marcus sitting in a classroom, calmly taking notes on interspecies communication protocols, while Fleet Commander Torgash observed from the back of the room. This human has been attending regular classes, helping classmates with their studies, and demonstrating remarkable patience with species whose capabilities he could easily overwhelm. His violence was purely reactive and precisely calibrated. He represents a paradigm we never considered, a species that has retained apex predator capabilities while developing advanced social cooperation and ethical frameworks. Representative Mordial of the ancient quantum high consciousness flickered between dimensions as their collective mind processed the implications. You're suggesting that humans are simultaneously the most dangerous warriors and the most stable civilizers we've encountered? Exactly. They didn't evolve beyond the need for individual lethality. They evolved to control it. Every human is potentially a one-person army, but their social conditioning ensures they only use that capability when necessary. Senator Vextera of the militant Titanosaurian Empire, whose species had conquered 12 star systems through sheer physical dominance, slowly stood to address the chamber. The simple fact that a Titanosaurian was showing concern sent ripples of unease through the assembly. Admiral, my people have studied warfare for 10,000 years. We have never encountered a species that combines individual lethality with social restraint. The implications for galactic power dynamics are transformative. Admiral Thylak agreed. If humanity decides to pursue military expansion, our current defensive capabilities would be inadequate. But, more importantly, if they choose to remain peaceful partners, they represent the most valuable allies we could possibly have. The display shifted again, showing Marcus's psychological evaluation results. This human scores in the 99th percentile for tactical thinking, situational awareness, and threat assessment. He also scores in the 99th percentile for empathy, cooperation, and peaceful conflict resolution. He is simultaneously the most dangerous and most trustworthy individual most of our psychologists have ever evaluated. Chancellor Crystal Hart's crystalline form refracted light in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. What are your specific recommendations, Admiral? First, immediate upgrade of human threat classification to code Omega Positive, potentially civilization-ending capability combined with demonstrated peaceful intent. Second, revision of all first contact and diplomatic protocols to account for species that may possess similar paradigms. Third, establishment of joint training programs to learn from human tactical and psychological methodologies. And fourth, the Chancellor prompted, sensing there was more. Admiral Thylak's expression became even more serious, if such a thing were possible. We need to seriously consider what would happen if humanity ever decides we're a threat to their survival. The chamber fell into absolute silence as this possibility sank in. Every representative began mentally calculating whether their species' defensive capabilities would be adequate against opponents who considered Marcus's performance to be average. The answer, for most of them, was a resounding no. Representative Zurgath of the Voidbane, the species that had successfully defended against 3 previous extinction-level threats, spoke for the first time during the session. Admiral, what assessment protocols should we implement to identify other potential human paradigm species? We're developing those now. Key indicators include evolutionary pressure from multiple apex predators, environmental challenges requiring individual adaptability, social structures that combine cooperation with individual capability retention, and technological development that emphasizes tools rather than biological enhancement. The implications of this checklist sent new waves of concern through the assembly. How many other species might share humanity's unique combination of individual lethality and social cooperation? How many potential allies or threats had they overlooked due to inadequate assessment criteria? There's one more thing, Admiral Thylac added quietly. The human mentioned that his specialty is engineering, not combat. We have no data yet on humans who actually specialize in warfare. This revelation prompted what could only be described as a collective existential crisis among the assembled representatives. If Marcus represented civilian-level capability, what might actual human warriors be capable of? Chancellor Crystalheart made the decision that would reshape galactic civilization. Motion to approve Admiral Thylac's recommendations and authorize immediate implementation of human paradigm protocols. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. The first time in Senate history that representatives from 47 species had agreed on anything without debate. Back on Kepler Station, Marcus was completely unaware that his explanation of basic human sociology had just triggered the most significant strategic realignment in galactic history. He was sitting in the mess hall, sharing his lunch with Cheekrick while helping his roommate understand quantum mechanics. You see, Marcus explained patiently, quantum entanglement means that observing one particle instantly affects its paired particle, regardless of distance. It's like cosmic telepathy, but with physics. Cheekrick's mandibles clicked with excitement as understanding dawned. So information travels faster than light. Not exactly. The correlation is instantaneous, but you can't use it to send messages because... Marcus paused, noticing that the mess hall had gone quiet again. He looked around to see hundreds of alien cadets staring at him with expressions that ranged from awe to barely controlled terror. Is something wrong? He asked innocently. In the distance, Fleet Commander Torgash was taking detailed notes on human educational methodology, specifically focusing on how they managed to make advanced physics comprehensible through casual conversation. The hegemony officer was beginning to suspect that humanity's intellectual capabilities were as far beyond galactic norms as their physical ones. Cheekrick, who had grown somewhat accustomed to being the roommate of a walking paradigm shift, simply patted Marcus's shoulder with one delicate appendage. Nothing wrong, Marcus. I think everyone is just impressed by your teaching skills. Oh, Marcus replied, genuinely pleased. Well, education is important. Knowledge sharing benefits everyone. The casual way he dismissed his apparently superhuman ability to make complex concepts immediately accessible sent new ripples of unease through the observing cadets. They were beginning to understand that humanity's advantages weren't just physical. They extended to every aspect of cognitive and social functioning. Dr. Alwyan Starweaver, who had been monitoring the interaction through her psychic abilities, made additional notes about human intellectual generosity and pedagogical instincts. Her report would eventually contribute to the Galactic Education Reform Initiative, which would restructure learning methodologies throughout civilized space based on human principles. As lunch period ended and cadets dispersed to their afternoon classes, Marcus remained blissfully unaware that his simple act of helping a friend with homework had just provided the blueprint for educational revolution across 47 star systems. Fleet Commander Torgash approached his table with something approaching reverence. Human Marcus, may I ask you about your teaching methodology? Certainly, sir. Is there something specific you'd like to know? How do you make complex concepts seem so simple? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think about what I already know that's similar, find the common patterns, then explain the new thing in terms of the familiar thing. Everyone learns better when information connects to what they already understand. The fleet commander made notes that would eventually revolutionize military training throughout hegemony space. And this is standard human educational approach. Pretty much. We call it meeting people where they are. You can't teach effectively if you don't understand your audience. As Marcus gathered his materials and headed to his afternoon engineering class, he remained completely oblivious to the fact that his casual explanation of basic pedagogical principles had just provided the foundation for interspecies educational revolution. Behind him, Fleet Commander Torgash sat in contemplative silence, wondering what other fundamental aspects of civilization might need revision based on human methodologies. The answer, as the galaxy was rapidly discovering, was all of them. But that was a revelation for another day. Today's crisis was still unfolding, as administrative offices throughout known space began receiving implementation orders for human paradigm protocols. The quiet revolution had begun, triggered by one young man's simple desire to finish his dinner in peace. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest actions. And sometimes the most dangerous beings are those who never consider themselves dangerous at all. 6 months after what became known as the Mess Hall Paradigm Shift, the Galactic Naval Academy bore little resemblance to its former self. The implementation of human paradigm protocols had transformed everything from curriculum design to architectural layout. What had once been an institution designed around the assumption that advanced civilizations naturally evolved beyond individual conflict capability was now a learning environment that acknowledged the possibility, even the desirability, of combining apex predator instincts with advanced social cooperation. Marcus Chun, now in his second term, walked through corridors that had been redesigned based on human spatial psychology principles. Gone were the open, airy passages that previous alien architects had favored. In their place were routes that provided multiple exit options, clear sight lines, and what human planners called defensive positioning opportunities, features that made most species feel more secure without realizing why. He was heading to his new assignment, Advanced Interspecies Combat Psychology, a course that had been created specifically to study human approaches to conflict resolution. The irony that he was now required to attend classes about his own species' psychology was not lost on him. Marcus! Cheecrick's voice echoed through the corridor, accompanied by the familiar clicking of his mandibles. Marcus's roommate had become something of a celebrity himself, as xenopsychologists studied how a prey species could successfully cohabit with an apex predator without experiencing continuous stress responses. "What's the emergency this time?" Marcus asked with affectionate exasperation as Cheecrick scuttled up beside him. "Not an emergency. News. Good news, I think. The Etherian Collective has officially requested human advisors for their military training programs." Marcus paused in his walking. The Etherians? The ones who spend most of their time existing as pure consciousness. The same ones. Apparently, they've realized that their psychic abilities are useless against opponents who approach conflict as a practical problem rather than an emotional expression. The implications of this development were staggering. The Etherian Collective had been one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations precisely because their psychic abilities allowed them to predict and counter most forms of aggression. If they were admitting inadequacy when faced with human-style, tactical thinking. How many species have made similar requests? Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. 37, as of this morning, Cheecrick replied cheerfully, though the Paklon Confederation wants to limit their request to agricultural and infrastructure defense. We're not really built for offensive operations. They entered the classroom to find an extraordinary sight. Representatives from 12 different species sitting in carefully arranged discussion groups, all focused on holographic displays showing various aspects of human behavior. At the center of it all stood Professor Kilthra Mindweaver, an Etherian who had volunteered to study human psychology despite the significant risk to her species' traditional worldview. "Ah, Cadet Chun," she said as Marcus entered, her translucent form shimmering with what he had learned to recognize as intellectual excitement. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the implementation of human-style threat assessment protocols. Marcus took his seat, noting that the other students now maintained what humans would recognize as respectful distance, close enough for social interaction, far enough for individual reaction space. The casual reorganization of social dynamics based on human unconscious preferences had become standard throughout the academy. Today's focus, Professor Mindweaver continued, is on the concept of controlled aggression. Cadet Chun, would you explain for our non-human students why humans distinguish between capability for violence and propensity for violence? Marcus had gotten used to being asked to explain his species' psychology, though it still felt strange to discuss instincts that seemed obvious to him. Well, most humans learn early that the ability to defend yourself and others is different from the desire to cause harm. We call it being prepared without being paranoid. Cadet Vortalix, a young titanosaurian whose species had traditionally equated physical strength with moral authority, raised a massive hand. But how do you maintain such capabilities without them affecting your psychological state? My people find that combat readiness inevitably leads to combat seeking. I think, Marcus said carefully, it's about purpose. We don't maintain these capabilities because we want to use them. We maintain them because we hope we'll never have to. The goal isn't to be dangerous, it's to be safe. Professor Mindweaver materialized her fascination as swirling patterns of silver energy. This distinction has profound implications for military doctrine throughout the galaxy. Traditional assumptions suggest that beings capable of violence will naturally seek opportunities to use that capability. Humans prove that assumption false. Added Cadet Cylindra of the Crystal Communion, her faceted form refracting light in patterns of deep thoughtfulness. They demonstrate that lethality can be paired with restraint, preparation with peaceful intent. The discussion was interrupted by a priority communication from Admiral Thylac. His massive form appeared in hologram, dominating the classroom despite being transmitted from his flagship halfway across the sector. Cadet Chun, Professor Mindweaver, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation that requires immediate consultation. The holographic display expanded to show a star map with a pulsing red indicator near the outer rim. The Zephyrian Independence Movement has seized control of 3 star systems and is threatening to attack civilian targets if their demands aren't met. Our analysts believe traditional diplomatic approaches will be ineffective. Marcus studied the tactical display with the same calm attention he gave his engineering homework. What are their stated demands, sir? Complete withdrawal of Galactic Confederation presence from their claimed territory, recognition of their sovereignty, and reparations for what they claim are historical injustices. And their actual goals? The question caught Admiral Thylac off guard. Explain. Sir, in my experience, what people say they want and what they actually want are often different things, especially when they're willing to threaten civilians to get it. Professor Mindweaver's energy patterns shifted to deep blue, the color of profound realization. The human is applying threat assessment psychology to political analysis. Marcus nodded. If someone threatens innocent people to achieve political goals, they're not really interested in politics. They're interested in demonstrating power. The stated demands are just justification. So what would you recommend? Admiral Thylac asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than mere courtesy. Find out what they're really trying to prove, then offer them a way to prove it without harming civilians. Most beings want to feel respected and capable. If you can give them that without compromising core principles, you neutralize the threat without creating martyrs or escalating to violence. The Admiral finished. Fascinating. And if they refuse reasonable alternatives? Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, taking on the same focused calm that had preceded the mess hall incident. Then, you demonstrate why threatening civilians is a poor life choice. The casualness with which he discussed escalation to lethal force sent familiar ripples of unease through the non-human students. They were still adjusting to the idea that their most peaceful classmate was also their most dangerous one. "Admiral," Professor Mindweaver interjected, "might I suggest dispatching a joint human-alien diplomatic team? The psychological dynamics could prove instructive." "Approved." Cadet Chun, consider this a practical examination in applied interspecies relations. As the communication ended, Marcus found himself the center of attention once again. The idea that a second-year cadet might be consulted on actual diplomatic crises would have been unthinkable before the human paradigm protocols. "Marcus," Chi Crick said quietly, "are you concerned about the mission?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I'm concerned about the civilians who might be harmed if we don't handle this correctly. The rest of it is just problem solving." The fundamental difference in perspective, seeing political violence as a technical problem rather than an emotional crisis, encapsulated everything that made human psychology so alien to the rest of the galaxy. 2 days later, the joint diplomatic mission achieved complete success without a single shot being fired. The Zephyrian Independence Movement leaders, faced with a negotiating team that combined human threat assessment with alien cultural sensitivity, discovered that their actual concerns could be addressed through constitutional amendments rather than armed rebellion. The human representatives' casual mention that civilian targeting was considered a war crime punishable by immediate and permanent intervention may have influenced their decision to pursue peaceful solutions. The success of the mission led to the establishment of Human Paradigm Diplomatic Corps, officially recognizing that some conflicts required representatives who could think like apex predators while acting like philosophers. Marcus returned to the academy to find that his role had fundamentally changed. No longer just a student trying to keep his head down, he had become an unofficial ambassador for human psychology, helping other species understand how beings from Deathworlds could be simultaneously the most dangerous and most trustworthy allies in the galaxy. The irony was not lost on him that his greatest contribution to galactic peace came from his capacity for control violence. In his final report on the Zephyrian crisis, Admiral Thylak wrote, "The human paradigm represents more than military doctrine revision. It represents a fundamental evolution in our understanding of what advanced civilization can become. Humans prove that retaining individual lethality does not preclude social cooperation. Indeed, it may enhance it by ensuring that cooperation is chosen rather than forced." The report became required reading in diplomatic academies throughout known space. Meanwhile, Marcus Chun continued attending classes, helping classmates with their homework, and trying to figure out quantum engineering principles that would revolutionize starship design. He remained unaware that his casual existence had become a case study in successful integration of apex predator psychology with civilized society. Sometimes the most profound revolutions are led by people who never intended to change anything at all. They simply live their lives according to their principles and let others draw their own conclusions. In Marcus's case, those conclusions had reshaped galactic civilization itself. And as he sat in his dormitory that evening, working on a project to improve starship hull efficiency while Chikrik practiced quantum mathematics nearby, the universe continued its ancient dance, a little safer, a little wiser, and considerably more aware that some of its children carried the capacity for both creation and destruction in perfect, careful balance. The quiet human from the Deathworld had found his place in the galaxy, and the galaxy had learned to be grateful that beings like him chose peace as their default setting. After all, as humanity had proven long ago, the most effective warriors are often those who prefer never to fight at all. But when fighting becomes necessary, they do it with the efficiency that only comes from treating survival as both an art and a science, and from remembering that the point of any conflict is not victory, but the return of peace. The stars continued their eternal waltz, and somewhere among them, a species that had learned to be both predator and protector helped guide the galaxy toward a future where strength served wisdom, and wisdom served all. It was, Marcus reflected as he completed his engineering calculations, a pretty good outcome for what had started as a simple desire to eat lunch in peace. Sometimes that's how the best stories begin, with small actions that echo through eternity, carried by ordinary people who turn out to be anything but ordinary when the universe needs them most. And sometimes the greatest gift a species can offer the galaxy is proof that even apex predators can choose to build rather than destroy, protect rather than dominate, and teach rather than terrorize. Humanity had given the galaxy that gift. The galaxy was still learning how to unwrap it,